In the depths of winter, Leningrad is a city of silence and snow. The Neva River freezes, its surface hard as steel. The air bites at your skin, the streets echo with distant footsteps, and behind certain windows, secrets are kept. In one of those cold, cramped apartments, a boy was born on October 7th, 1952. His name, Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin. No one looking at him then could have guessed that one day this child would hold one of the most powerful positions on Earth for decades.
He came into a city still scarred from the Siege of Leningrad, a brutal World War II blockade that had starved its people and left its buildings hollowed by shell fire. His father, a factory foreman and war veteran, had been wounded in the fight for the city. His mother had nearly died of starvation during the siege. Hidden gem fact number 1. During the siege of Leningrad, Putin's mother fainted from hunger and was mistakenly placed among the dead until a neighbor noticed she was still breathing. Vladimir grew up in a communal apartment, one of many families crammed into a single building, sharing kitchens, bathrooms, and gossip. Privacy was rare. Every word could be overheard, every secret dangerous.
As a boy, he was wiry, restless, quick to fight. Teachers described him as both intelligent and difficult to control. He wasn't the tallest or the strongest, but he had a knack for reading people, sensing weakness, spotting opportunity. And from a young age, he was drawn to stories of spies, Soviet intelligence officers, secret missions, invisible wars. He devoured books and films about them, imagining himself slipping through enemy lines, uncovering plots, defending his country from unseen threats. Hidden gem fact number 2. At age 12, Putin began practicing Sambo, a Soviet martial art, and later judo, becoming a black belt and a regional champion. He wasn't dreaming of being a politician. He wasn't even dreaming of being a soldier. He wanted to be a spy.
By his teenage years, he'd already made up his mind. He would join the KGB. But in the Soviet Union, that path wasn't advertised. There were no application forms, no recruiting booths. You didn't ask the KGB to notice you. You proved yourself until they did. Putin studied law at Leningrad State University, not because he loved legal theory, but because it was a common gateway into the intelligence world. He kept a low profile, stayed out of political trouble, and learned how to blend in when it suited him. When graduation came in 1975, the moment he'd been working toward arrived. The KGB recruited him. The boy who had grown up in the shadows of Leningrad's crumbling streets was about to enter a new kind of shadow, one where trust was rare, information was power, and loyalty could mean survival.
The spy in East Germany. The KGB headquarters in Leningrad was an imposing structure, gray stone, heavy doors, and eyes that followed you from the shadows. Putin walked through them as a young officer, his training complete, his mind sharp. He was now part of the Soviet Union's most secretive fraternity. His early work was in counterintelligence, rooting out those suspected of betrayal. But soon, he was assigned abroad, to Dresden, East Germany, in the 1980s. It was a world of wiretaps, dead drops, and whispered exchanges in smoke-filled cafes. East Germany was a front line in the Cold War. The Berlin Wall stood like a scar across the heart of Europe. On one side, capitalism. On the other, communism. Both armed to the teeth. Both convinced the other would blink first. Putin's role wasn't glamorous. He wasn't James Bond. He was a mid-level intelligence officer, building networks, collecting scraps of information, and quietly strengthening the Soviet position in the East. But he was patient, and patience was a spy's most valuable currency. Hidden gem fact number 3. Putin speaks fluent German, a skill honed during his years in Dresden, where he often served as interpreter for Soviet officials. For years, the rhythm of his work was steady. Then, in 1989, the world shifted overnight. The Berlin Wall fell. Crowds surged through the streets of Dresden, tearing down the old order brick by brick. East Germany was collapsing, and with it, the entire Soviet grip on Eastern Europe.
At the KGB office in Dresden, the mood turned from tense to desperate. Protesters gathered outside, shouting, some threatening to storm the building. Putin called Soviet military command for protection. No one answered. It was his first taste of what it meant when the center no longer held. When he returned to Leningrad in 1990, the Soviet Union itself was on the edge of collapse. The red flag still flew over the Kremlin, but its days were numbered. Putin left the KGB officially in 1991, but the KGB never really leaves its officers. The discipline, the secrecy, the habit of seeing every interaction as a transaction, those stayed. Back in Leningrad, he needed a new role. The spy would now have to become something else, something more public. And the next phase of his life would put him on a path from the crumbling streets of post-Soviet Russia to the highest office in the land.
The climb through chaos. St. Petersburg in the early 1990s was a city in transition. The Soviet Union had collapsed. Stores that once held nothing now overflowed with goods, but most people couldn't afford them. Gangsters roamed in shiny black cars. Fortunes were made overnight, and lives were destroyed just as quickly. Putin returned to this turbulence with no official title, just his skills, his discipline, and his network of contacts. Soon, he found his way to Anatoly Sobchak, the charismatic and reform-minded mayor of St. Petersburg. Sobchak was everything the young Russian democracy hoped to be: confident, Western-looking, bold. He needed someone who could navigate both the old Soviet structures and the new capitalist chaos. Putin became his right-hand man. He managed foreign relations for the city, a role that seemed administrative but was anything but. He brokered deals with foreign investors, oversaw major trade agreements, and quietly built alliances that would serve him for decades. Hidden gem fact number 4. Putin once arranged a shipment of food to St. Petersburg during a shortage by trading it for Russian raw materials, a deal that would later be scrutinized for corruption but cemented his reputation as a problem solver.
His style was reserved. While others in politics sought the spotlight, Putin preferred the shadows. He observed, learned, and struck only when the moment was right. But politics is never stable. By the mid-1990s, Sobchak's popularity waned. When he lost re-election in 1996, many of his allies were pushed out, including Putin. It could have been the end of his political career. Instead, it was the beginning of something much bigger. He moved to Moscow, taking a job in the Kremlin's administrative offices. To outsiders, it looked like a minor bureaucratic role, but Putin understood something others didn't. Proximity to power is power. He impressed his superiors with his efficiency and absolute loyalty. In a city of shifting alliances, he was seen as dependable, and in Russian politics, that was rare. By 1998, President Boris Yeltsin appointed him head of the FSB, the successor to the KGB. In less than a decade, Putin had gone from a low-profile city official to the chief of Russia's most powerful security agency. Hidden gem fact number 5. When Putin became head of the FSB, he reportedly kept his old office furniture instead of upgrading to something more lavish, a move that signaled humility or strategic modesty.
The next step came swiftly. In 1999, Yeltsin made him Prime Minister of Russia. Many Russians didn't even know his name, but they would soon know it very well. Because in just a few months, he would be president, and his rise would come in the middle of a national crisis that would define his image for years to come. The rise of the strongman. The summer of 1999 was tense. Bombings in Russian cities killed hundreds. Apartment blocks were turned to rubble overnight. Panic spread through the streets. The government blamed Chechen separatists.
As Prime Minister, Putin took to the airwaves with a tone Russians hadn't heard from a leader in years. Firm, direct, uncompromising. "We will hunt them down everywhere," he vowed, "even if we have to get them in the toilet." The bluntness shocked people. The resolve electrified them. This was not the uncertain, stumbling leadership of the late Yeltsin years. This was a man who promised action and delivered it. The Second Chechen War began. Russian forces pushed deep into Grozny, the Chechen capital, in a brutal campaign. Television broadcast images of a confident Putin visiting troops, shaking hands with generals, and looking directly into the camera. The public took notice. His approval ratings soared from obscurity to near 80% in months.
Then on December 31, 1999, in a move that stunned the world, Boris Yeltsin resigned early. And in his televised farewell, he named Vladimir Putin acting president of Russia. New Year's Eve fireworks lit up Moscow's skyline. For many, it felt like a new beginning. For others, it felt like a return to something old, a leader from the security services now holding ultimate power. In March 2000, Putin officially won the presidential election. He was 47 years old. His first term was focused on restoring stability and projecting strength. He consolidated the media, reined in the power of oligarchs, and reasserted Moscow's influence over Russia's far-flung regions. Hidden gem fact number 6. When Putin first moved into the Kremlin, he reportedly brought his own judo mat so he could train in between meetings. His style was different from Yeltsin's in every way. No rambling speeches, no visible drinking, no public displays of illness.
Putin cultivated an image, the action man. Photos of him shirtless on horseback, swimming in icy rivers, flying fighter jets. It was political theater, and it worked. By his second term, Russia's economy was booming, fueled by rising oil prices. Moscow gleamed with new wealth. Middle-class Russians could buy cars, travel abroad, and dream again. But behind the growth was a tightening grip. Opposition voices found themselves marginalized. Critical journalists faced threats, some paid with their lives. As his second term approached its constitutional limit in 2008, many wondered if he would step down quietly. Instead, Putin engineered a move that kept him in power's inner circle, becoming prime minister while his ally Dmitry Medvedev took the presidency. It was a shuffle, not a surrender. Everyone knew who still called the shots.
Tens of thousands of protesters filled the squares. They chanted, waved banners, and demanded fair elections. The spark? Vladimir Putin's announcement that he would run for president again in 2012. For many Russians, it was no surprise. The castling move with Medvedev had always looked temporary. But for others, it felt like the rules had been broken.
The idea of one man holding power for decades ignited a rare wave of public dissent. Putin, however, was unfazed. He framed the protests as Western-backed attempts to weaken Russia. And in March 2012, he won the presidency with over 60% of the vote. His third term began under a cloud of both victory and defiance. The economy slowed, relations with the United States cooled further. Then came Ukraine.
In 2014, after months of protests in Kyiv ousted a pro-Russian president, Putin acted swiftly. Russian forces, without insignia, appeared in Crimea. Within weeks, a controversial referendum was held, and Moscow declared Crimea part of Russia. The move stunned the West. Sanctions followed. NATO shifted its posture. But inside Russia, Putin's approval ratings soared again. Many saw Crimea as a restoration of lost pride, a reclaiming of history. Hidden gem fact number 7. Putin's grandfather, Spiridon Putin, once worked as a cook for both Lenin and Stalin, a connection he has mentioned only rarely. Internationally, however, the standoff deepened. The war in eastern Ukraine simmered. Russian jets buzzed NATO airspace. Cyber attacks became a new front. Meanwhile, Putin continued cultivating his image at home. The decisive leader, the defender of sovereignty, the man who could stand up to America. In 2018, he ran again, and won again. By then, he had been in power as president or prime minister for nearly 2 decades. But time changes everything. The protests that once fizzled began to reappear, especially among younger Russians who had known no other leader. They wanted change. Putin, on the other hand, wanted to ensure his legacy and his control. In 2020, amid the global pandemic, he pushed through constitutional changes, allowing him to potentially remain president until 2036. It was a move that cemented his place as one of the longest-serving leaders in Russian history. Yet with that power came new challenges: economic pressure from sanctions, political opposition from figures like Alexei Navalny, and growing unease from a world watching Russia's every move. The war that shook the world. The morning of February 24, 2022 was quiet, until it wasn't. Sirens wailed in Kiev, explosions thundered in Kharkiv. The world woke to the news that Russia had launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. For weeks, Western intelligence had warned it might happen. Many doubted it would. Putin insisted he was conducting a special military operation to protect Russian-speaking regions and demilitarize Ukraine. But the images told another story. Tanks rolling over borders, families fleeing with suitcases, cities under siege. Inside Russia, the government tightened its grip on information. Independent media outlets were shut down. Social media platforms restricted. Criticism of the war became a criminal offense. Hidden gem fact number 8. Putin is fluent in German, a skill he used in high-stakes negotiations with European leaders, sometimes switching languages mid-conversation to unsettle them. On the battlefield, the war proved far costlier than expected. Russian forces faced fierce Ukrainian resistance. Months turned into years. Casualties mounted. Internationally, Putin's image split even more sharply. To supporters, he remained a strong man standing against Western dominance. To critics, he was an aggressor dragging Russia into isolation.
At home, despite the strain, polls showed a significant portion of the population still backing him. A mix of nationalism, fear, and loyalty built over decades. Yet cracks were visible. Economic hardships grew. Military setbacks shook confidence. And the question hung in the air: how long could this war go on? By 2025, the conflict had become the defining battle of his career, and perhaps its most dangerous gamble.
The legacy question. By 2025, Vladimir Putin stood as one of the most recognized and polarizing figures on Earth. A man who had risen from the narrow stairwells of a crumbling Leningrad apartment block to the marble halls of the Kremlin. A man who had shaped, for better or worse, the fate of nations. In Russia, his rule had spanned more than 2 decades, longer than many Tsars, longer than the Soviet leaders who came before him. He had seen 5 American presidents come and go. He had navigated financial crises, wars, and pandemics. Hidden gem fact number 9. Putin has never owned a smartphone. He reportedly avoids carrying one for security reasons, relying instead on aids and secure landlines. But even the most enduring leaders face the shadow of time. The question wasn't just how long Putin could hold power, it was what Russia would look like after him. Would he be remembered as the man who restored Russian pride, or as the one who led it into prolonged isolation? In private, those close to him say he still works tirelessly, late nights, briefings stacked high, a mind always moving 3 steps ahead. He rarely talks about stepping down, and when asked about retirement, he simply smiles and changes the subject. Hidden gem fact number 10. Despite his hard image, Putin once released a children's book in Russia about rare Siberian wildlife, inspired by his conservation projects. For the world, his next moves remain unpredictable. The war in Ukraine still simmers, Russia's economy adapts under sanctions, and alliances shift in ways no one can fully control. History will write his final chapter, but right now, in this moment, Vladimir Putin remains at the center of it all. Every decision he makes sends ripples across the globe. Every move could change the course of the 21st century. And maybe that's the real story. Not just the boy from Leningrad who became president, but the leader whose choices still have the power to alter history.
So as you close this chapter, ask yourself, what will be the final line in the Vladimir Putin story? And will we even see it coming? Because one thing's certain, with Putin, the ending is never predictable. If you've been with me on this journey through his life, from the cold streets of post-war Leningrad to the battlefields shaping the present, thank you. If you found this story gripping, eye-opening, or worth sharing, hit that like button. Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your take on Putin's legacy. And subscribe so you don't miss the next deep dive into the life of another world figure. Because the stories that shape our world deserve to be told.